I'd like to thank you for viewing this upcoming video. We will be talking about domestic violence and the need for emergency services. The Domestic Violence Bridge Program will help establish a safety plan for individuals and families that are faced with domestic violence situations. The organization will work with local shelters and other network providers to help in emergency placement and services. Since January 2019, when COVID-19 first was introduced to the American public, many of us realize now that the government had to shut down our nation to protect us, but the percentage of domestic violence because of that situation rose by 8%. This percentage is actually a very conservative estimate, understanding that the cause and effect of isolation contributes to domestic violence. The loss of income, children being home from school, parents working from home, and the fear of the unknown are all contributing factors to the uptick in domestic violence. Sometimes when an individual calls for help to escape from domestic violence situation, they should have a reasonable expectation that they are going to receive help. However, that is not always the case. Sometimes shelters are not taking new clients, or maybe there's not a shelter in the area where the individual lives. Now, Domestic Violence Bridge, the program, is designed to provide emergency shelter to domestic violence victims and their families when there's no other option available. Domestic Violence Bridge will help with emergency shelter, mental health services, child care services, educational programs, and employment placement assistance when necessary. Although our doors would be open to anyone that's experiencing domestic violence, our target population is going to be minority women, men, and children, especially those 60 and older. However, like I said, the doors will be open to anyone that is in need of emergency help. The mission of the Domestic Violence Bridge is to offer housing to domestic violence victims and their children in an emergency situation. The program, like I said earlier, will help in education, empower domestic violence victims to become independent, and provide services to the families such as education, child care, employment, placement, and counseling. Several of the services that will be offered will come from the executive director of the program, which will be hired as a full-time staff person. Will also be needing a crisis intervention assistant or advocate. The CIA person will actually oversee the day-to-day residential operations, including but aren't limited to crisis assessment and intervention, mediation, and provisions for basic needs. Educational needs for this person would require a bachelor's in social work, psychology, or criminal justice, and at least 3 years experience. Full-time case manager is also going to be needed, to maybe multiple case managers actually as the program grows. But in the beginning, we're going to need a case manager. Will help clients with sustainable housing and employment development, healthcare applications, child care needs. There's a multitude of different things that they'll help with. Then, of course, we're also going to need a mental health therapist. This person will also be licensed with the state, and they will have a 3 to 5 years experience working with domestic violence victims. They will also provide mental health support to the victims as well as family members that are involved with the situation. When we talk about domestic violence, we are talking about vulnerable individuals that may or may not be able to defend themselves. And when we speak about domestic violence, many times we're talking about children who are not protected by another parent or adult that's available in the situation, because that person may be a victim as well. So, in order to help these victims overcome the stress of domestic violence and to break the cycle of domestic violence, this program is going to need to be sustainable through um, through many avenues. Our first avenue is obviously we're going to establish a relationship with local motels or shelters that we can use to establish emergency housing for individuals that are needing to get out of a placement that they're currently in a domestic situation. Then, with that being said, we'll also incorporate the mental health uh, aspect of it and have the mental health therapist to work not just with the victims but also with the perpetrator if possible, or have a referral made for the perpetrator to work with another therapist. We will be looking at the history of the violence in the mental health, as far as the mental health is concerned, and also in the environment in which they live, which could also include the neighborhood they live in. We want to break the cycle. We want to teach people that this does not have to be a lifelong thing, that it can be broken. And one of the outcomes we would desire for that is that these individuals become independent from the perpetrator. So we want to teach them educational programs that help them grow, not only just physically or, excuse me, emotionally, but also educationally. We want to help them prep with a GED or prep them for college, anything that will get them independent from the perpetrator. One huge aspect of getting them independent is also health care. I touched on this earlier. We want to make sure that they are applying for the proper health care for not just them, but for also for their children. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that they know what's available to them. So the case manager would be in charge of doing that as well. And then along with the emergency sheltering, we want to do training classes, which would include financial training as well as in, independent skills, um, some self-defense as well, and we'll get them counseling so that they can deal with the different aspects of the violent behavior. And in closing, the Domestic Violence Bridge program is needed to help bridge the gap for domestic violence victims when there are no other option available. With the rise in COVID cases in the past few months and the uncertainty of our current nation, tensions are high, which increase domestic violence. We are As we come alongside with the current resources available, it is essential that no one feels they feel they have no options in order to leave a violent situation. Funding is needed to bridge the gap between shelters and those seeking help. The goal of Domestic Violence Bridge is to fill in those gaps by providing safe places, quality services, and mental health services to all who need it. So as you can see, there is a great need in our community to have these services provided. And my goal and the goal of the Domestic Violence Bridge is to offer these services to those free of charge, but without funding, that is not possible. So that is where you come in. The funding needs to be available to start this program and to work alongside with the other programs that are already available. Please consider helping to fund this program today.